Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Maggie Caesar. I'm the Senior Customer Marketing Manager at eBuilder. We are on week 3 of this ongoing webinar series, and today we're going to be discussing social distancing in the field. All right, so at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dan Connery and Matt Sprague from our product marketing team.
Excellent. Thank you, Maggie. So as Maggie mentioned, my name is Dan Connery. I'm part of our product marketing team. I'm joined by my colleague, Matt Sprague. Matt will disappear in a little bit once he says hi to everyone, and he's going to be looking through the questions you're asking. So again, like Maggie mentioned, I ask you please ask questions throughout the webinar. Something we did unique this week is we did poll the folks who registered early and ask them which questions would you like to see us ask this week. So the actual order of the questions was voted on by the audience. So we'll do that again this week also. So I'll go ahead and let Matt introduce himself, and then I'll introduce the panelists.
So Dan just stole everything I was going to say. So I am now, I'll just urge you once again, I'd love to be able to be super busy and hectic trying to field and filter through all these questions. Last week, I know Dan had that experience, and I'm expecting the same thing. So please make sure you utilize that feature, and I'll pop in and out from time to time to engage our panelists in questions that are coming from the audience. So have fun, everybody.
All right. Thanks, Matt. So I'm excited and honored to have another set of panelists, a great set of panelists. Those who attended week 1 may notice a repeat panelist. So I'll start there with Benjamin from Yates Construction. So he actually participated in our week 1. I enjoyed the conversation so much, and Benjamin didn't hate it so much that he agreed to be part of our panelist on week 3. We also have Angela from Yakima County. So she'll represent as part of our owner voice. And then one of the unique components we're doing this week is we have David joining us from Parsons. So one of the things we've received some feedback is that although people love hearing from our individual customers, they would love a perspective from a larger group of people. And so we brought one of our partners in because David speaks with dozens, and then across Parsons, probably hundreds of owners out there. So he's going to give us a more broad view of some of the questions. So I'd like to welcome our panelists. And I'll actually start in the same order I did my little brief introduction. So Benjamin, if you wouldn't mind, a little bit about yourself, a little bit about Yates, please.
Thank you. Benjamin Crosby. I'm the Director of BIM and Virtual Design and Construction for Yates Construction. Also for all of Yates Company. So we also have some self-perform work, subcontractors, even get to represent the owner side of things on the project every couple of years. Yates does a little short of $2 billion worth of work a year, and so we are a fairly large contractor, and so we are all across the country as well. And so projects from California to Maine, kind of everything in between. And so it gives an opportunity to kind of see overall what we're seeing and what I've seen and what's taking place right now.
Excellent, awesome. And Angela, I'd ask the same question to you, a little bit about your organization and a little bit about you.
Thanks, Dan. My name is Angela Ringer. I'm the contract administrator and eBuilder admin for Yakima County. We are located right smack dab in central Washington state. A population of about 250 to 300,000 people. Our county road system is primarily my main function, but we also serve project coordination and management for the utilities department, water resources, solid waste divisions. And we implemented eBuilder about 2 years ago, and really glad to be a part of the panel today.
Awesome, thank you. And then David.
Hi, so I'm David Dwyer. I work for Parsons. I'm a senior systems integration specialist with their digital solutions team. So Parsons, we have offices and projects all over the globe, primarily focused on things like defense, intelligence, cybersecurity, engineering services, a lot of digital solutions that get provided. And we serve a lot of government clients as well as critical infrastructure projects. The team that I work with digital solutions, We focus a lot on systems implementation, especially around PMIS and managing capital programs and helping a lot of owners out there find the right solution, get it implemented for them, and use it to help manage their projects and their programs. And right now, we have a lot of e-builder clients that are out there and currently either still implementing the product or successfully using it to manage their projects day to day.
Awesome. So for those in the audience who may feel like the questions are going to feel slightly disjointed, that's purely because we reworded them purely based on what people wanted to hear about. So there is some intentionality behind this. So I actually find this first question interesting because it was a topic of conversation in our first webinar, and that is, I don't want to come across at all at underplaying the negative impact and some of the negative consequences of COVID on us and our extended family and our partners and et cetera. However, I do believe that there's a lot of good things that are going to come out of what's happened. And so the first question, and I want to make the question a little bit broad in the beginning and then focus it on field, because that really is the core focus of what we want to discuss today. But what are some of the changes that you hope don't go back to the way it used to be? And Benjamin, if you don't mind, I'd actually like to start with you because you had some good thoughts on this during week 1, but now 2 weeks have gone by. So in the 10 business days, has anything changed?
Well, a lot's changed regarding that answer. Probably not as much. Because we were heavy into virtual design and construction, then we already had WebEx accounts in place. We'd already had practice with virtual meetings. And so while that expanded, and there was quite a few people who hadn't done as many virtual meetings before, like one particular client, all through the bidding process, had insisted you need to be on site for these meetings, things like this. I'd been flying to another state on a regular basis, and then I haven't gone back, but the meetings have still gone really well virtually. And so I think that reduction in cost of travel is going to be beneficial, and I think it's going to stick. There'll be a lot more meetings similar to this. And so that is one positive change. And then another is that I have seen a noticeable amount of people that are getting more into the idea of the project management system, the virtual design and construction, just kind of that forced transition for some of those people that weren't as willing to transition before. And I'm very excited about that and the idea of getting away even from some of our carbon lockers. First it was paper lockers, then it was just digital, but it was just in a folder system, to a real management system, and the excitement of having a real management system with assignable tasks. And even in the last 2 weeks, I've seen a noticeable increase in desire for that.
Cool. David, same question for you.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of really good points. And we've seen a lot of similar things. I mean, this has been a little bit of forced adoption for some of our clients that are still going through like systems implementations or really getting comfortable with PMIS applications. It's also served a bit as a proof of concept for people that didn't necessarily think that they could be productive outside of an office setting and working remotely. For a lot of us that are used to doing more of the consulting side of it, I mean, I'm used to working from home. I'm used to working from basically any place I can sit a laptop on. But a lot of people are still stuck in an office mindset. So this is really reinforced for them that they can still be productive while working remotely. It's also offered the benefits of some alternative scheduling when it comes to working and not necessarily being tied to a desk from like a 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. It's allowed people a little bit more flexibility. That's again been forced on them because they have other responsibilities of dealing with, family and things at home and trying to juggle all of that. But I think it's really promoted a lot of flexibility when it comes to, still being able to deliver your job, complete your job and deliver on the work that you need to.
Okay, Angela?
So I would absolutely 100% agree with both Benjamin and David's answers, but I'd also add that the force into this environment that we're all working from has also given people the opportunity to slow down a little bit and look at some things that maybe they weren't looking at before, because it was go, go, go. You had to go to the field. You had to, these things all had to happen. And so we seem to have a little bit more time to actually recognize how efficient our online collaboration and our PMIS systems are, and how we can actually still continue to do the same work, but not have to be in the office to achieve, get the job done. The field, the field offices, a lot of the things that are going on out in the field, the work's still getting done. They're just taking some additional safety precautions, which is never going to be a bad thing, even outside of this environment that we're living in today. So I just think that overall, it's just been a real eye-opener for a lot of people with regard to, again, like what David and Benjamin both said about people who are resistant to, the electronic environment and the use of online systems. It's really been an eye-opener, and people have been able to see that these things really are great, and the work can still move forward even if we're not able to do it face-to-face.
Yeah, and it's interesting because some of those topics that you just covered, Angela, was in our session last week. We talked about moving away from paper into a digital process. And then some of the questions that came up in this week, people wrote in questions we're going to answer next week because it wasn't field specific, but it's clear that that's still a hot issue as far as efficiencies. To your point, people have more time to work. I look at this webinar today, we had over 1,000 people register for it. Typically for us, we would be happy if 100 people came to a webinar. So you can just see a marked improvement of people trying to figure out how to be better, and that's good. The reason why it's happening sucks, but the fact that it's happened is actually good. So Benjamin, I want to come back with you and get a little bit more focused, because what I remember in week one of the things you talked about was inspections. So there are certain things that, at least right now, you can't physically install stuff remotely. You can't be at home installing drywall and doing actual work. So there are aspects where people have to be out. And I'm just curious, again, you mentioned about inspections, and what I recall is you said people are asking some of the inspections, why do we even do these inspections? So you have that part, but just as much as you can share, because I know you can't share a ton, but as much as you can share, what have you seen has shifted specifically around social distancing in the field?
So very specifically with inspections, then wide variety of projects across the country, different jurisdictions, different approaches to things. And so we've seen some where the authority having jurisdiction inspectors are no longer going out and working. And so some of our already hired third parties inspectors are on site and they're picking up some of that. We've had some video documentation, photo documentation of, hey, these things are done, let's look at them. You can walk through it on a WebEx sort of thing like this with your phone and, hey, show the other person and let them look at it and see what's done. And so we still want that verification that the inspection's taken place, but we are seeing a good deal of, I guess, creativity on how to do that inspection while trying to keep everybody safe and healthy.
Good. Angela, any thoughts from your perspective on work in the field?
No, basically, I just agree with what Benjamin said. There's a lot of, we're just finding that we have a lot of tools available to us to still get the job done. We want to see that the work's happening and that it's happening in the way that it needs to happen. And with all of the technology we have available to us today, we've been successful in continuing to move projects forward, the ones that are still, happening.
Okay, and I'll jump to Matt and then we'll go back to you, David. But I think that's an interesting point, Angela, and maybe we'll come back to this after Matt asks his question, but it's that despite the requirements and social distancing, projects are moving forward. So people are figuring out how to work. So go ahead, Matt.
It's as if you knew what the question was. It's figuring out how to work. So there are actually two questions, and I'm seeing more come through. So maybe there's more, but the two that I'm going to kind of key in on. that had to do with figuring out how to work with social distancing is there a common practice in the field when it comes to transporting employees in company passenger vans? This person said they've implemented a 50% occupancy with masks. Is that sufficient? And then the second question along the same lines dealt with that this person deals with school construction. Are some new safety practices taking place in the construction sites in the field? So be interested to see in terms of transportation, but also other type of social distancing policies and procedures that are going on.
So David, maybe I'll start with you if you have anything you'd like to add, and then I'll go back to our other panelists.
Yeah, so we've definitely seen that. Thinking specifically about one of the larger infrastructure projects that I've been working with, they've definitely instituted like a 50% policy when it comes to traveling, especially with, if you have multiple people in a vehicle. They've also set up procedures in place to say that if workers need to be assigned, multiple workers need to be assigned to the same area where they can't really practice proper social distancing, that additional PPE gear is being supplied, specifically masks, where it really, is going to be beneficial for their safety and for everybody's safety. And we definitely, and it's funny that this comes up with inspections, because we see that a lot with our inspectors too. And it's really, a lot of it has to do with, making sure that resources that are still doing this work out in the field are being assigned appropriately, so that you don't have large groups of people that are all assigned to the same area. And that if they are, or people are traveling to the same area at the same time, that, you're doing everything possible to make sure that everybody's staying as protected as possible.
Benjamin?
Yes, we've had some projects that did have intensive busing from a remote parking location to the project site, and that quickly able to get in there, and turns out there was a whole bunch of school buses available. They were more than happy to rent at a reduced rate because they weren't being used. And so we're able to then expand that so that people weren't packed in there. But it's still really hard to be 6 feet apart on a school bus. And so, masks help a whole bunch. We also had other projects, one particular project where all the students are now gone home and parking is premium. And so hardly anybody's carpooling now, right? Before, everybody was trying to figure out how to ride with each other because you couldn't park near the site and everything. And now that's just opened up, and it's actually made that aspect of it much easier. But for both of those aspects, whether it was busing or carpooling, a distinct effort to make sure that people that rode together also work together, because there's many instances where they are going to be within 6 feet of each other, laborer, apprentice, working with someone, they're handing each other tools and equipment. So if they were at least on the bus together or riding together, having them work together, then reduces that risk. Also, the difficulty if someone does come to the job site and they find out they've been there Wednesday and Thursday, and then on Friday they find out that they have a fever, and so then they're not supposed to be at work for the period or till they've been tested. And so then who would they work around? That's all difficult things to figure out. And so having a plan ahead of time of these people are working together, these are crews, then helps to reduce that impact of one person, causing a whole bunch of others to not work.
Then, Benjamin, one of the things we talked about briefly on week one was about lean planning, and one of the methodologies that I learned, which is the parade of trades. Could you speak a little bit about? It was amazing. I never even thought about the carpooling thing, right? Everything was about carpooling, getting more people more tightly packed for environmental impact, and now we're going the exact opposite. And I think similarly with scheduling work, it used to be you wanted, soon as one person left, the next person's ready to go right behind them for productivity improvements. But what's the impact been around scheduling and such?
So we're really heavily into lean and our last planner system anyways, and so we have really always wanted to make sure that this trade was done before the next trade came into place. And so that is even more important now because you don't want them packing in together.
Right.
It's a little bit more emphasis there. At the same time, it's harder to have those meetings because typically that's a big room meeting and you pull everybody in and they're all standing there looking at one board. And so we have to look at doing that virtually, and we're figuring out ways. Some larger rooms, outdoors, some projects have gone to, but trying to do that high level of planning to make sure that we reduce the overlap and the interface as much as possible between people, while still continuing to get the work done as needs to be done and keeping people safe.
Got it. And I'm just wondering, I know, David, you had mentioned it at home, being more flexible around work time. I'm just wondering, in the field, is there a similar flexibility of flexing crews and staggering work, and maybe overall the work day is longer, though for no individual is it longer? Is that happening at all out there?
I've definitely heard of some of that. I'm not too clear on how much has been implemented, but it's definitely been ideas that have been floated for some projects and from some project managers. I think, we've said it before, is that everything just comes down to planning and having a plan in place and really being able to execute that. So I think, given the current conditions that, everybody's dealing with, that I feel like, no idea is a bad idea at this point. And, trying to remain flexible, especially when it comes to scheduling and when it comes to assigning people to areas and what work needs to be done, I think has really been key to help keep a lot of projects moving forward, and not let them stall out or stop completely.
Got it. So Angela, I kind of bounced between David and Benjamin for a little bit there. What thoughts on either Matt's question or anything we've discussed so far?
Well, we're pretty small. Our organization is on a way smaller scale than what Benjamin or David have going on. However, with regard to, from an owner's perspective, our management team has done a really great job of just implementing the social distancing policies during this time, where our survey crews used to travel, in teams, and now it's one man per vehicle. The inspectors, everyone is to wipe their vehicles down at the beginning and the end of each day. I know our road maintenance crews who used to travel, in teams, are all solo now, and they're alternating 1 week on, 1 week off, so that they're able to reduce the amount of exposure, and risk for people. And so that in itself has changed quite a bit. Our contractors are working really hard too, to just make sure that their operators are wiping their machines down, and that they're really focusing on that social distancing and the PPEs right now to keep everyone safe.
Okay, so it's not just, even though the focus of today was specifically around social distancing, I'm glad that you brought up as far as the protective equipment as well as the cleaning things down. So that wasn't part of my thought. The other thing I'd love to tease on with the panelists is horizontal construction, or maybe I should say outdoor construction versus indoor construction. Could you maybe touch on that a little bit? Obviously, indoors is tighter than outdoors, but are there other things that you've implemented? I'll just stay with you, Angela, as far as, because I assume most of your work is outdoors.
Yes, most of ours is outdoors. So not a lot has really changed for the horizontal construction, because they have the ability to maintain that distance, even because you're in the outside air. Other than the fact that how they're traveling to and from the sites is changing, and how they are conducting their crew work. It's just there's more care and precautions being taken to make sure that people are maintaining their distance from someone who could potentially be ill.
And has there been a increase, same, or decrease? Because one of the things I've been hearing and reading about, specifically around infrastructure work, and specifically around road work, is a lot of people aren't out on the roads, and therefore now's a good time to try to get those projects going. However, just the other day, we got an internal report at Trimble that there are municipalities and DOTs that are concerned because gas tax revenue is expected to be off, both with the decline in price and decline in usage. So is there anything, Angela, you could share with us around that?
I did actually see that comment that now would be a great time to fix the roads because less people are on them. However, that requires people to go into closer spaces, and there's, the crews just don't have the ability right now to, and the Washington State DOT, basically almost all of them, well, I guess not all of them, but a good majority of the DOT in Washington is teleworking, and they are only putting, 1, 2, 3 crew members in a shop at a time and 1 man per vehicle. So for projects, for say, pavement repair and things like that, it's just it's either not feasible or they just haven't yet figured out how to make that possible.
Okay. Matt.
So just to kind of piggyback on what's happening here, this is now the third time this question's been asked around we're talking about all of the different policies and procedures that are being put in place. Have you guys seen a decrease in productivity within your projects, and if you can share by how much?
Anybody want to touch that one? Go ahead, Benjamin.
There's so many projects. So yes, especially queuing, trying to get everybody on the job site, taking temperatures, trying to get phase 1 of revitalizing everything going so that we're ready when it starts, and be prepared for all of that. And so, yes, staggering people coming to the job site means that some are there later, some are there earlier, trying to figure those things out on a very large scale basis. Then there has been some reduction in the amount of time that people are working. Now, I think it's just kind of maybe a side effect of it, and it's something that I feel like I've observed. I don't have numbers to back this up, but I feel like people are being more efficient while they are working, because I think there is a lot of people that are, like myself included, I am very happy that I am still working, because I have neighbors around me who are not in that situation, that do not have any work right now because either their own business or whatever business they're in is shut down. And so I think that I feel that those that are working have been more in tune to what am I doing, how am I doing it. And so I have not, across the board, not seen a huge change. Some projects have gotten hit and had a tougher time in certain areas, especially in areas where there was a case on site or something like that, where then a number of people had to leave. Yes, they felt the productivity pain. Some trade contractors, while the whole project hasn't felt it, there's been trade contractors that lost 8 people, 10 people. And so all of a sudden they're behind trying to find new crews. And so I think in general, it's not caused a lot of productivity pain, but very specifically, yes, it has hurt in places.
David?
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I mean, thinking back to just, some of the major projects that I've been interacting with over the last couple of years, I feel like some haven't slowed down at all, and they've continued on the pace that they were doing, while still being able to, implement new policies and procedures to help keep everybody as safe as possible. And I've also seen projects that were had approved budgets literally one day, and the next day got a stop work order for all construction work, on that site. And that obviously impacted, a lot of people and a lot of trades and a lot of groups. So, I mean, I've definitely seen specifics that have been impacted. I do agree that I think that, the projects and the teams that are still moving forward are finding ways to really make the time that they are available to work on a project more efficient. And maybe it's because a lot of the distractions are cut down, and maybe it's because of an overall sense of urgency from a lot of people to keep pushing forward with a lot of this work, especially with infrastructure projects because of how important they are. I think, there's people that are just adapting and adjusting to, the overall situation what everybody's dealing with, and just trying to keep things moving forward in the best way possible.
Angela?
So I would just add to that, and I'm not sure what it's like, nationwide, but for the state of Washington, our governor deemed residential construction as non-essential. So basically, all of the residential construction or anything not healthcare, government, or COVID necessary or essential was halted, and that's really affected the contractors in a lot of ways. You've got a vertical construction project, whether it's maybe a business office building, and if that business office building is not deemed essential in that it doesn't serve government or healthcare, they're stopping. They've had to stop. So that loss of productivity in the contractor world has been a real hot topic here in Washington, and I'm not sure if that's nationwide or just the state of Washington. I'm assuming it probably is that same way in other states, but for Yakima County and the state of Washington, the non-essential projects that have been shut down have really obviously seen a huge problem when they've had to lay off their employees, and so it's definitely had some impact here.
Benjamin?
Another thing that we're still trying to make sure we have our hands around is going to be the lack of productivity due to supply chain. For a little while, we had a little bit of a bump that you had jobs on site that required an N95 mask, and there were none available. Now that's not as bad, and you can get them for those that are needed, and you're trying to make sure you balance between it. And so, but there's going to be other supply chain bumps coming, and so a lot of effort on our part to be looking at that and say, what can we do to avoid, mitigate things that were shut down in a port, that was supposed to be on its way, but it's now locked down somewhere and can't get off of the truck or boat that it's on because some of those other items, essential, non-essential, gets mixed in there. And so a lot of it comes back to thinking ahead and trying to identify those as much as possible, find alternatives, and then do what we can to keep those that are working as effectively as possible.
David?
Yeah, no, I mean, I haven't specifically seen some of those same issues, but I fully believe that stuff like that, especially with impacts to the supply chain, are really going to impact everybody. I think, I agree that I think, now it's starting to become slightly less of an issue. Things have seemed to have calmed down at least a little bit when it comes to being able to, supply projects and to keep some things moving forward. But there was definitely I mean, inevitably was a disruption there, and especially when it comes to making sure, that everybody had the right protective gear on a lot of projects.
Got it. Now, Angela's already answered most of my next question for her part of the country, which is to share what is deemed essential and non-essential. And so some folks will be geographical. So I just be curious that maybe, again, starting right back with you, David, since you have the broadest approach, what are you hearing? So Angela, it was healthcare and government were the two areas that she's hearing in her neck of the woods as far as what's essential and non-essential.
Yeah, government, keeps moving forward. A lot of the infrastructure projects that I've seen, people that are working on roadways and bridges, that's still moving forward. We have some clients that, deal heavily with utilities, especially, with water and wastewater. That's all still, a lot of that work is all still moving forward. We have seen some airport projects that have slowed down considerably or stopped altogether. And even future work that, was in that same space, with dealing with a lot of the airports has all just been paused and held until, a later date, and nobody even knows when that's going to be. So, I think it all depends on the industry that you're serving and if, the resident base that you're serving, but, the government and utility and a lot of the critical infrastructure spaces that we've seen have continued to move forward.
And Benjamin, what I love about having a contractor on is that you guys service a ton of different industries. So you'll probably give us a neat, broad spectrum.
And we've seen a huge variety from state to state, right? We don't have the privilege of doing anything in Washington state right now, so I'm not as familiar with those, but there are other states where that line between what is essential and what's not essential is a little bit harder. And so some projects are slowing down, stopping, whereas recently we had a school project where they fully anticipate having students back at school this fall, and so that needs to start. And so collecting bids on a project just not too long ago, and everybody not knowing price is going to come in high, price is going to come in low, where is this going to sit? Well, it's going to vary from state to state and location to location. And that state, at that location, the prices came in nice and tight and good pricing. It was a little lower than what might have been thought, but not so low to be scary. And so it was about what it was. And, you know, consensus is, hey, we have a project that's going on, other projects are shutting down, let's make sure that we're a part of this work. But there didn't seem to be any feel of desperation to chase work. And so trying to make sure that trying to, I guess, follow all the different rules and trying to narrow down what are the rules and checking every day and reading through every day and what is the enhanced recommendation, what is what we should be doing. And we find ourselves balancing in the middle because we want to keep people working because we have contracts, we're expected to complete them, we honor those contracts, and we're going to do that with a safe and healthy workforce. And so we want to implement those things, but if you get too far one direction or the other, then you have to course correct and try to stay in that middle road. And that's been a hard road to find, especially from state to state. And so there's a lot of times we have a excellent individual who I've always given much credit for keeping people out of trouble. And he's on our HR kind of legal team. And so there is lots of times you just need to call him and he will help because he is so good at looking at a situation and saying, what is the best way to keep everybody good and whole on this, and let's make it happen. So having some individual who is really keeping track of all of these different things, states, counties. We did face a difficulty for a time, and I don't know if this one's passed yet or not, but there was a particular county that stopped allowing travel through the county from outside. And a large part of our workforce lived on the other side of the county, so it was like an extra 45-minute drive around. But we weren't working, they weren't living in the county and they weren't working in the county, it just was in the way. And so those situations, you just got to take them one at a time and sit down and walk through them and have somebody that's keeping up with stuff. Is about the best I could say.
Got it. That's interesting example and great advice. So the one thing that I'll share with the reach that Trimble has across the various industries, so we're deep into the owner market, deep into the contractor market, and also deep into the specialty contractor market. And what we've been doing is aggregating across all those markets, what are we seeing? So the only part I'll layer in is that there's, and this may be of course, Captain Obvious moment here, but I just want to say what we're absolutely seeing is a direct correlation between revenue stream for our customer and whether or not there's work coming out. So David, you had mentioned as far as airports. So we saw the exact same thing. A couple major projects put on hold because 90% of the revenue for airports is no longer exists because very few people are flying. Tax revenue is weighing on the minds of gas tax revenue is weighing on the minds of DOTs. We've seen a big slowdown in healthcare because healthcare, all of the high revenue producing functions and healthcare institutions are now on hold because they're non-essential. So it's pretty much dealing with keeping people alive. And although an important component isn't the high revenue generating, so they already have the capacity. So, and then interesting, I never thought about it, but with K through 12, although Benjamin, you mentioned you have a project that's kicking off, one of the challenges we had is a lot of the kids haven't had the opportunity to go back to school and remove their personal effects. So some places are having difficulty with construction because there's still stuff there, and they're trying to deal with how they get the stuff out. So anyways, there's a direct correlation. But what I've been really honestly shocked with is when we, across all of that, we've seen less than 20% drop off in projects. So probably about 70-ish% are saying that things are going the way they were pre-situation. And then we've had several that said they're stopping, but we've had that offset by some people who are increasing the number of projects they're working on. So, part of me at one point thought all projects were going to stop, and then how are we going to survive as a country? But it's not quite that bad. So anyways, I'll get off my little soliloquy here. And so that's what we're seeing as far as Trimble reaching across a couple thousand different organizations out there. So the last two questions I have explicitly here. One is, what are you doing today to keep apprised of what's going on in the field? So not getting as specific as measuring productivity, but just in general, you could just drive to the site or fly to the site and look and check out what's going on. But I'm imagining internally that's probably non-essential. So how are people keeping apprised of what's going on out in the field? Angela, I'll start with you.
We just currently have 1-2 active projects that we do have an inspector who's visiting the site every day, and he's submitting his, his IDRs. And then we have another project that's essentially in design phase right now. So there is some utility relocation happening, and the construction manager has been visiting the site, has been in contact with, the contractor, and also the survey crews have needed to be out there. But those gentlemen are just really working hard to practice their social distancing while still being able to get their work done.
Got it. So social distancing practices in place, but no new technologies to help, let's say, remote monitoring or anything?
Not anything other than things that we were doing, beforehand, such as photographs, iPhones, and so no.
Got it.
I can see that there's a lot of opportunity for that, though. A drone would come in handy right now, wouldn't it?
So David, I'll go to you and then I'll finish with you, Benjamin. But anything you're seeing from different practices for remote, I don't want to be prescriptive, not remote monitoring, just stuff to see what the heck's going on site.
Yeah, so definitely the reliance on photo and video has definitely increased. The check-ins and communication happening between people that are still in the field, that are still moving these projects forward, and project managers or construction engineers has definitely increased. The level of communication and back and forth I've seen really increased. I've seen a larger reliance on web conferencing and where you used to be able to get everybody together in a room to go through some things, instead, using the digital tools that are out there to web conference together, whether it be through screen shares or just sharing photos and videos has really increased a lot too. Again, I just think it's, people just doing anything that they can, using the tools that are available, and sometimes new tools to them that they've never even thought of using before, to keep, the communication on these projects active and keep things moving forward.
Benjamin?
So I've seen this with work and a lot around personally, that what used to be important maybe isn't as important now. And so more targeted conversations. And so just taking pictures to have pictures, which used to be a lot more of, I think is now, hey, we're taking pictures for a reason. And so I don't know that we're taking more pictures. I think we're taking better pictures. I don't think we're having more meetings, but I know we're having better meetings. And we're focusing in a little bit more on the aspects that really make the difference on the project, and some of the things that you did that you've always kind of done them, but now you're like, they just slipped away and you realize, well, I haven't done that in 2 weeks. Do I really need to be doing that? And so that I think there's been a little bit of change in focus and attention from a lot of different people and roles and positions. And I think that's covered a lot for the change in other behaviors.
And that, it goes back to that, you can tell it stuck with me when you talked about in week 1 about questioning inspections was just the example. So what I'm hearing in week 3 is it's question everything, something that I've always believed on a technology side. Don't just do stuff because you've always done it, but is it, and I love what you just said, Benjamin, you know, we're not having more, we're having better. So I think that's a key takeaway for those in the audience is it's an opportunity to really do more of what's good and stop doing. You have an excuse now to say, yeah, we're not doing it because of our current situation. That's why we're not going to do it anymore. So that's awesome. Well, I have a very specific question that I'm going to come close to ending on, but I just like to know in general, one of the things I've observed within Trimble is a sense of community, not only within the company amongst departments, but even extending out to our partners and our supply chain, that it feels like people are just being a lot more decent to each other and not allowing contractual vehicles to say we can't be friends or cordial towards each other. I'm just curious, are you seeing that? Because this industry is very fragmented when it comes to contractual obligations between all the parties. Are you seeing any people just being nicer to each other? Or is it same old, same old? So David, I'll start with you.
Yeah, no, I definitely have. I mean, the question makes me think of a couple projects that I'm working on, especially ones that are like in implementation of you know, PMIS systems where you know, we had a pretty strict schedule for how we were going to deliver stuff, and you know, we've seen that loosen a little bit to everybody's benefit, you know, because there are delays that are just you know, outside of everybody's control right now. But it does seem, you know, that everybody has become a little bit more cordial, a little bit more friendly, you know, a little bit more focused. You know, and I've seen that on a couple of the different projects and clients that I've worked with. And I think it's just sort of a natural feeling, you know, to kind of start to progress that way, you know, for a lot of this work.
Benjamin?
So I have a couple anecdotal instances where, yes, meetings that have been going on for a period of time, that there have been difficulties and people had started to build up a little bit of angst towards each other and weren't, you know, getting along very well. And now all of a sudden, over the past 2 weeks, some of those meetings are just seeming smoother. And I think that's part of that focus again, that thing that we're worried about over here that everybody was kind of arguing about wasn't really even that important anyways, and it just kind of went away and someone just took care of it because they were more worried about, you know, the person being healthy on site. So I have seen some of that. And some of the people that sometimes are a little more difficult to work with, then you don't see them as much, and that might help too.
So a little bit more breathing room. Got it. Angela, how about you? Any observations of people's demeanor towards each other?
Well, like Ben says, you know, not seeing some of those people, you know, as often as you're used to has made things a little bit less difficult. But you know, the human element is very present for people right now. It's not always just business as usual. People are actually taking the time to stop and say, you know, how are you doing through all of this? And how's your family holding up? Is everybody healthy? And, you know, so the human element, I believe, has somewhat returned to our workflow, in that oftentimes when we get so dialed in on the things that we think are so important, in times like this, we are reminded that we're all still human beings and that element exists in our day-to-day lives. So, you know, as a contract person, and one of my main roles is contract administration and making sure that we follow the contract. You know, sometimes we do get hung up on those things that we think matter because they're in the contract, but I have seen some opportunity for things to be less, the focal point of the day doesn't have to be, you know, what type of screw we're using for this thing. Because, yeah, we can just blame it on COVID if we go.
Got it. So the last question that I want to ask, and then I'll have Matt come back on with any final questions from the audience. So if you've been waiting and holding off on asking our panelists a question, please get them in now, as we're starting to come to the end. And again, this is a very specific workflow, and it's one of my personal ones, so I forced it back into the list even though it didn't get a lot of votes. That's my prerogative as host, is around punch lists. And quality, and a little bit about inspections, but I'm used to punch lists, the owner's there, contractors there. If it's vertical construction, you'll have the architect there. If it's horizontal, you have an engineer. These tended to be, by definition, large group events. And I'm just curious with that particular workflow, if any one of the panelists wants to pick up on it, what's going on with that type of work? So Benjamin, I'll start. Okay, David, I'll start with you.
I was going to say, I think it just goes back to, I agree, those used to be very largely, get together in a room and hash it all out with a large group of people. I think I've seen, processes and workflows that we have for things like inspections and punch lists are starting to get used more. Starting to see people weigh in more using things like comments and again, like web conferencing tools and, getting people together on a lot of, there's so many different web conferencing tools now, whether it's, Teams or WebEx or Zoom or any of them, just being able to get together and find another way to get together to still, handle those reviews and push that work forward because they're still critical parts of the project. Just finding a way to get it done while still just maintaining safe discipline because you can't meet in a job trailer now, or you can't meet in an office conference room now for a lot of this work and for a lot of our clients.
Got it. Angela? No,
Really,
Benjamin.
we haven't had any punch lists, so I don't have, we're not at the tail end of any project, so I just really don't have anything on that.
Yeah, no worries. Benjamin.
So that quality process, whether it's punch list at the end of the job or just making sure that every lift is compacted the way it's supposed to be as we go and everything's right, then there's used to be those bigger events because of trying to have accountability and make sure that everybody knew this is the item that has to be corrected or this is what was wrong. And so I've fought with some very large, cumbersome punch lists in the past, and I'm a huge advocate of having a good punch list management system. And so having an electronic system where you can take the punch list items and you don't have to be in a big group because somebody records them and they can easily take a picture of it right there and attach the picture. Because I don't know how many times I've had people swearing they've done the punch list item and they've done it 5 times and they haven't ever done it because they were doing the wrong spot because they saw something, all of that stuff all goes away if you have a really strong electronic accountable system where they can put an item in there and assign it to someone. And so we have not seen a big change there because having a system in place that does that, we're able to keep flowing and we don't need to have the big group meetings. And that is easier if you have an accountable system.
Got it. All right, Matt, I'm going to hand it over to you for questions from the audience.
Yeah, I think we have time for essentially one more, especially if this goes around the horn. Just to say we've had some fantastic questions, and I'll talk about the remainder of the questions at the end. But this question in particular, I think helps kind of maybe kind of puts not necessarily a bow, but helps us kind of finish out the topic for the day. And it actually has to do with when the governors start to kind of lift the restrictions and we start going back to the office and more freely back to the field, has any of you and your organization start to have a discussion of what that's going to look like and how we're going to get back out, to the places of employment?
Yeah, I can speak at least a little bit to that. I can think of so one of the concerns from some that I've heard from a couple projects is especially for work that's currently slowed down right now, and having contractors or project management teams or design teams or consultants that have had to go find other work to keep themselves going is once restrictions are lifted and once our projects start again, are we going to have access to the resources we used to have to continue that work and pick right up where we left off? And there's a lot of concern around that because, a lot of the consultants and the contractors that are being used, they're not stopping and necessarily waiting for that other work to pick up. So, there's been a lot of discussion and a lot of planning around, how do we get these resources back on site, back on task for this work that was stopped or stalled once those restrictions get lifted. And it's just another level of planning that's going into place, not just planning for what's going on right now, but planning for what's going to happen, in the near or long-term future.
And before we go to the next person, one of our internal conversations in the 2 unplanned webinars left in this series is to have an entire webinar on this very topic. One of the things that we've heard from one of the industry groups is for owners who have ceased work, that there could be up to a 15% premium applied when they start their work up again due to the labor shortage that you're talking about. We already had a labor shortage. This could potentially exacerbate it because a bunch of projects are going to hit at the exact same time. But Benjamin, same question to you.
So we have not seen a lot of projects close down. It might just be the projects we had or something like that. And so a lot of the practices that we are doing to be healthy and safe now are a lot of the same practices that we're going to be doing in a phase 1 implementation. Temperature checks in the door, masks for everybody, 6 feet of distance, traveling together. And so in some ways, we feel like because construction, the parts of construction that were deemed essential were still essential, then we're kind of already moving towards that phase 1. And so, but then once again, finding those differences, and this county said this, or this city, or this, governor is doing things a little bit differently. And so trying to stick with sit down, read the CDC recommendations, follow them, and then look at, is there something else that I need to be doing because someone else asked for a little bit more somewhere? That's what we think getting out to phase 1 of getting things back in order is going to be all about. And then people's reactions, I think we're starting to see that in the news, and we're starting to see that on our projects where people are having different reactions to some of the precautions that were in place 2 weeks ago. That 2 weeks ago, they were like, hey, yeah, this is good. And now you're hearing some individuals be like, well, I don't want to do that anymore. And that is going to be a challenge as we roll into phase 1, is people's opinions are going to start to come back into play.
Angela?
So I would definitely agree with what Benjamin said, and add that, we're waiting for guidance. Our projects haven't stopped. We didn't have a lot of projects going on, but we need guidance from our legislature or our governor or whoever's making the rules. And you have, some people on one hand who are just ready to hit the ground running, and they want to go back to work, and they want to, and then there's still, some that have some significant fears and want that additional protection. So you kind of have to take what the CDC is telling you, what your legislative body is telling you, and what your people are telling you, and kind of figure out how to mesh all of that together so that you can return to work and you can do it safely, effectively, efficiently, and in a way that serves pretty much everyone's needs, not only the public, but your employees, with the office. So I can see where when they're going to start phasing all of this in. The other element that we have, working against some people is the fact that in Washington State, schools closed for the remainder of the school year. And I think that that's probably the case around the nation. So you have people who are maybe teleworking or not working right now, but when it's time to start lifting those restrictions and for people to come back to work, do they have the means to have their children be cared for, or do you need to find, alternative ways to allow them to continue working from home as they have been? So there's a lot kind of playing into phasing back to work right now, and everyone is really anticipating, just some answers. But right now there just doesn't seem to be any real solid answers as to how that's going to happen in our part of the country anyway.
Got it. Well, I'll end and say thank you to our panelists. I know Matt's going to introduce next week's topic and next week's panel. So again, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to share your stories with our audience.
So yes, as you guys can all see from the screen here, next week's we're really excited. The good, the bad, and the ugly, the expected/unexpected consequences of the interruption. So we really doing a couple things with this one is that This one is dedicated to some of our partner organizations, having them participate. And the methodology behind that, we thought, was that they can share multiple, if not hundreds, of customers' experiences throughout this time frame. But then we're also kind of taking the greatest hits from the first 3 webinars that we've run, the most popular questions that have engaged our audience the most, and posing it to them as well. So if you've sat in on any of the first 3 webinars and you've enjoyed the questions, we're going to be able to get an even wider swath of experiences shared with all of you next week. That's it for me.
I think we'll have the registration. We'll go into the chat here.
It is. I think Maggie just posted it up. So any of you that want to register ahead of time, and we will do just like last week. We will actually survey any of the registrants to the questions that we plan on asking, which are most important to you guys, so that we involve the audience even more.
All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you, Matt and Dan, for facilitating the discussion, and we hope to see you all next week.